Elizabeth,
welcome
please.
to today's conversation for our times from St. Basil's Parish in Ottawa, and a special welcome to our guest speaker, Anne Walsh in Newfoundland. To begin, we acknowledge with gratitude and respect that we gather here on the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin Nation, whose presence here dates back to time immemorial. We honor their long history of welcoming many people to this beautiful territory, and we uphold and uplift the values of our host nation. I am Elizabeth Larmond Elliott, parishioner at St. Basil's, and the members of our team for today's conversation are Kevin Burns, Andre Saint-Jacques, and Jennifer Letty. Father Daryl is officially away, but he's joining us online for this meeting. I'm going to turn it over now to Kevin Burns to explain how the meeting will proceed.
Yes, and welcome everybody too. So our presentation today, like we always do, features a conversation. It features dialogue, it features question and answer. There are two ways to raise a question. One is to click the reactions button at the bottom of your screen if you're using a computer screen. And in that reactions box, it'll say raise a hand. And a little hand will appear, and we'll see them all in sequence, and we'll get to the question in sequence as soon as we can. You might not want to do that. You might simply want to ask a question in the chat box. And if you do that, just pop it into the chat box and I'll be moderating that, and we'll do a blend of turning toward people to ask their own question and raising questions that are in the box. We will talk a little bit more about question and answer when we get to that point, and how we want to focus and frame that today. But I call Andre Saint-Jacques now to introduce our guest.
Thank you, Kevin. When Father Winkler asked me to introduce today's guest speaker, my first question was, who is Anne Walsh? An internet search brought me to two sites providing a short biography of Anne. And since those sites were managed by the Redemptorist orders, I thought I could trust the information. You never know about the internet, but in that case, I thought I could trust it. Then last weekend, Father Eddie's homily spoke about the public and the private, the outer self and the inner self. It dawned on me then that the biographical notes that I had found told me what Anne is, that is, her achievements, not who Anne is. We also know that we are in part the product of our environment and our life experience. So, based on the biographical notes, I have tried to get a glimpse of who Anne Walsh is, and to share that with you. Anne was born and raised in a Catholic family in St. John's, Newfoundland. My interactions with people from Newfoundland has taught me that they are resilient, welcoming, community-minded, with a strong sense of humor. So that might give us a bit of an idea of who Anne is. Anne obtained a bachelor's degree in education from Memorial University and started teaching music and religious education in rural Newfoundland. So I concluded that Anne is indeed community-minded and maybe has a bit of a missionary spirit. Then a bend in the road and the work of the Spirit brought Anne to go back to school to pursue a master's in religious education and a certificate in youth ministry studies in Toronto, joined the Redemptorist as a lay associate, and worked in various capacities with them, including in parish pastoral teams. At the same time, she pursued a doctor in ministry degree from St. Stephen's College in the University of Alberta. How about some other qualities of Anne? Energetic and strong-willed. I'm just speculating here, but I think you would agree with me. Anne has been devoting her working life to youth and young adult ministry across Canada, in the US, and in Ireland, as well as to religious education and in adult faith formation in various school boards, parishes, and dioceses, including the Archdiocese of St. John's. She has served on various committees of the Canadian Conference of Catholic Bishops and has contributed to a number of documents on adult faith formation under the auspices of the CCCB. To my mind, the missionary spirit shows up again. Anne still finds time to pursue other passions. I don't know how. She's involved in choir singing, playing music, and crafting in particular. Coming to the topic of today, abuse by persons in authority in parishes and other religious institutions have injured primarily victims and those close to them. But it has also and continues to have consequences for the broad Catholic community, not the least in Newfoundland. And I believe that this is what Anne will be addressing, amongst other things, today. So I'm turning over the mic to Anne Walsh.
Thank you very much, Andre. I'm going to just use this as a personal reflection. Certainly, there's a lot of history that's gone into this, and then we'll open it up for conversation amongst us. But I'm really privileged to be with you today and to share some of these reflections. What I'd like to do, I'm going to use a PowerPoint, but really it's to be a bit creative. I'll start with my story and then try to do something a little bit creative with where I've gone in my own journey, trying to deal with and respond with love and compassion to this crisis that continues in our church and in our world. So if it's okay with you, I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to, and hopefully this will work. I don't think it will though. Hang on. Let me try this again. I'm going to stop.
It's working just well. You're on screen
Okay.
now. It'll screen, I think.
Okay. I am going to try. I'm going to go back here again and just try this again. Technology is great when it works.
It's working very well. It's just not quite on the right file, on the right slide, but you'll get there.
It's still gonna go to that last slide. Let me try this once more.
You need to click on the start from it's called slideshow start as opposed from the current slide. You're in slide 1 now.
From the beginning, but it still won't do it, which is very odd. Let's do this one more time.
Yeah, so click into the frames, the PowerPoint screen, and then click onto the top.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen.
Yeah.
And I open it.
Yes.
Okay. And it should look right.
Yeah, from beginning. It's that from beginning.
No, it still doesn't want to do it, which is really strange. Let me try this. Aha,
okay.
there we go.
Because it's still playing it. That's maybe the issue is preventing you. So now go back and do from beginning, and it should click onto that screen.
Okay, let's try that one more time.
Yeah, it's all fine. It will
work.
work.
It's just being a real pain now today.
Yes.
And let's try it again from the beginning. But no, it is not wanting to do this at all. Let's try this way. Oh, here we go.
You got it.
I just have to click back and back and back. So sorry for that, folks, but obviously my expertise is not in technology. So I'm going to just share with you through the lens of the landscape and the sea, some of my experience with this crisis in our church. Know from looking at me that I'm not young anymore. I went to work as a young teacher in rural Newfoundland. In 19...
There she is. Voila.
Okay, let me try this again because Zoom apparently keeps crashing. So I'm not sure what to do.
You just froze for a minute.
Yeah, and I'm going to try this again and we'll see if it works. All right, I'm going to try to share my screen again. Yet once more. Okay. There we go. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. So as a young teacher, I was teaching in this place that I loved, a lovely rural community in Newfoundland and Labrador, but where there was tremendous poverty. It relied on the fishery. And I felt like a missionary. I was really glad when Andre said what he picked up, because that was my experience. I felt like a missionary there. And those people were wonderful. The night in 1988, before Father Hickey was charged, my mother called me on the phone to tell me that he would be charged the next day and that my cousin was one of the people charging him, one of the first three. My first response was to be heartbroken for him, for the person I loved, and this great distress that someone who represented church could hurt a young person. Think of it, I'm a young teacher. My life is given to young people. The thought that someone could so deliberately hurt even one. Later, when the magnitude of that crisis continued to unfold, and realizing that it wasn't just one and that there were systemic issues, that really created a cascade of responses in me. So the next morning, I went to school to teach grade 9 religion at 9 in the morning. The devastation of those young people that morning really moved my heart. I always used to say, I don't teach religion, I don't teach music, I teach children. But that morning, that came home to me in a way I could never have dreamed possible. We put aside anything of curriculum and just began to talk to one another, to talk about their anger, first of all, their loss of trust, their feeling of having been abandoned. If I ever thought that day that it was going to be one day that I would put aside the curriculum, that I was disabused of that notion really quickly. For months after that first charge, and then the number of charges that came after it, I discovered that my task was, first of all, to walk with my students, to try to teach them for sure, but to try to walk with them, to accompany them, and to be present to them. And then I realized to their parents, because one of the things that became very, very clear in me at first, and then I became aware of it in other people, was that nothing in my own religious education equipped me to deal with this situation well. My feeling as a woman, as a teacher, as a person, was of being devastated and of being woefully inadequate to walk with my students and their parents, the other people in the community. It was just an experience of trial by fire. But the question for me always was, how am I going to be the most compassionate, the most loving presence to others when it's hard to find someone who can be that for me right now? The whole community was thrown into this experience of grief, of sorrow, of trauma. And we really didn't know where to go with it. For me, it was the beginning of a struggle to discern where God is present and how I can represent that God in this community that was struggling so hard to make sense of what was going on around them. Where that eventually led me, and Father Darrell will know this piece of the story well, is that in 1991, on my 30th birthday, after 3 years of this unfolding crisis, as the Winter Commission was about to present its work in Newfoundland and Labrador, I decided that I needed to be better equipped. If I was going to do more than teach religion or teach music or teach art, and really be a companion to people as they sought God, then I needed to study theology. And so I decided to go to Toronto to St. Michael's College and study for a Master's of Religious Education degree, And I always framed it for me to be part of the solution, whatever that was going to be. So I went to Toronto, and there I met up again with the Redemptorists, who I had met as a young person, but now they became a significant companion to me. Another experience of church and of belonging. And for the first time in years, I felt invited in. Some of you said you're going to need tissues for this, and I might need tissues at this moment. But it's really significant in my life that at the moment when I was struggling to find how I could be a better companion to those who are suffering in pain and experiencing trauma, with the tools, with the skills I had and the tools I had, the Redemptorists came into my life again and became that for me. They gave me a safe place to fall and a community. So I always feel blessed. And further, they called me to more. And for that, I am eternally grateful. So I went back to Newfoundland and Labrador after my Master's of Religious Education degree. And this time I became a school board coordinator of religious education. And so the great joy of that for me was that I became someone who could help to form adults, teachers in faith, so that they could walk with their students in this ongoing and evolving trauma that we were all experiencing in real time together. It was still unfolding, as indeed it still is in its ramifications. In Newfoundland and Labrador in 1997, we lost denominational schools as a result of 2 public referenda. And what came about as a result of that was a realization that parishes now had to take up the job, the ministry of catechetical formation for children, but it became very, very obvious that for many years, decades, we had put all of our catechetical eggs in the children's basket, and we hadn't formed adults in faith. And so to be able to shape some of that at the very beginning, the response to the loss of denominational schools and what the future might look like, that fell to people like me. I became a director of diocesan adult faith formation at that point, and am tremendously grateful to have had that experience. So the rest of my life, I think you can say, has been an attempt to address the faith formation of adults and to really recapture that importance of adult catechesis as the primary form in our church. Helping people to walk with what I was going through myself. So really to be a companion, a sister on the way, as we all struggled with our loss of trust in institutions, not just the church, but there was a bigger picture that evolved as time went on. Governments, police forces, other community agencies. It was a bigger picture. So to walk with people as together we experienced that loss of trust, and then to ask questions became, I think, my biggest role in life. To ask people questions that helped them to probe their own experience, and in the process helped me to probe my own. That notion of faith-seeking understanding was so important to me. Some significant moments in my life since then have been in 2001, when we experienced 9/11 together, that tremendous experience of violence on a scale rarely known on our own shores. I was working in Gander. And so to be, again, called into mission, to be present to people who were traumatized in a very different way. More than that, to watch how the people who are church in Newfoundland and Labrador reached out in welcome to other traumatized beings. It was a tremendous experience of resilience, of witnessing resilience in action, of hope. It was I'm tremendously grateful to have been working and ministering in Newfoundland and Labrador at the time. When Pope Francis came about and gave us that wonderful word, mercying, in his own description of his, what do you call it, his logo almost. The word mercying became a very important one to me. And as I reflect on it, I see mercy as the language God speaks, and that's what I'm called, what we're called to speak in the world, to speak the words of mercy through action in our lives, to feed people who are hungry. And all the hungry people are not hungry for food only, to clothe the naked. And people need to be clothed with dignity before ever they're clothed with clothing. So to look at mercying as the task of my life and the task of the church, as together we face this trauma we've all faced. Then again, another experience that I want to tell you about that jumps out for me was in 2018, a group of us planned our 40th high school reunion. And I was charged with preparing the prayer service. And what I was asked to do by the ladies, the women who were with me on the planning committee, was don't make too much God, don't make it too churchy. And that really pointed out to me one of the responses of so many people as they walk this road of living in the wake of the abuse crisis is really to ask, where is God? And how close am I to God? And somehow to conflate faith and God, church and God. So trying to ask some of those questions of myself as I planned that prayer service. For me, a constant question, constant, every day, and sometimes multiple times a day, is how do you stay faithful when? And there have been so many endings to that question, when. How do I stay faithful when my cousin is abused? How do I stay faithful when my pastor is charged? How do I stay faithful when people walk away and I'm still here behind saying, where am I supposed to go? To whom shall I go? So for me, one of the things that I've tried to do is try to make sense of it by looking at Newfoundland geography. Now, this may seem strange to you, but it's been really an important task for me. And I've been doing a lot of reflection on this. So there we go. This is Cape St. Mary's. Newfoundland is all rock. We're even called the rock. And so I equate rock with steadfastness. And it helps me to ask the question, what does it mean to be faithful? To whom am I faithful? And for me, there's been an evolving and a constant, is it faithful to church? Is it faithful to institution? Is it faithful to God? Faithful to people? To whom am I faithful? What does that look like? What does faithful act like? How does faithful feel? And I want to tell you a story as I ponder that word faithful. I was actually in a courtroom at one point in this whole process. And it was a really windy, stormy April Newfoundland day, but it might as well have been February. And one of our, the lawyers for the plaintiff was from somewhere in the southern United States. And he came with just a sports jacket. And this was a day when you needed a down-filled coat. And so I went to one of around the building and asked some of my friends and coworkers, anybody have a coat to lend this man? And somebody actually said, why would you give him a coat? I said, because he's cold. And the person said, but they're the lawyer for the plaintiff. And I said, but he's cold. Now, we did obviously find him a coat. But what absolutely kind of shook me to the core was that an adversarial process could make us adversaries. When on either side of that courtroom, the people were ours. They were our brothers and sisters. They were our friends. And still the process had made us adversaries. And I vowed that day never to let that happen again. Here in Celtic theology or Celtic spirituality, we often talk about thin spaces, places where the veil between heaven and earth is very thin. And I think this is a moment this moment that's been going on since 1988 is a thin moment when we're prompted to ask, where is God in our midst? Not out there, not up there, but in our midst. And when we can be tempted, or I can be tempted to be very insular and protective, to challenge myself to be open and to be looking for God within and among and around rather than out there. For us, ocean is really a symbol and an experience of paradox. My grandfather used to always say, don't turn your back on the ocean, because although the sea is beautiful and can be calm, in an inkling, in a moment, it can become something very different. It gives life and it takes life. So for me, this moment is a moment of being in the ocean. I'm saying moment, and it's been nearly, it's been 30 some years, but that experience of paradox is still with me. I experience this like an ocean in the midst of paradox constantly. There's a great Newfoundland poem that I want to share with you from E.J. Pratt, and it's called Erosion. It took the sea 1,000 years, 1,000 years to trace the granite features of this cliff in crag and scarp and base. It took the sea an hour one night, an hour of storm to trace the sculpture of these granite seams upon a woman's face. Seems to me that expresses something of what I've experienced, what we've experienced over these years. Thought, another paradox. As I look at Newfoundland geography and our way of life, so much of it is paradox. Salt flavors and it preserves, but it can kill you. Everybody's tolerance for salt is different. So it spoke to me. And when we read in Matthew's gospel, you're the salt of the earth. What does that mean? Surely it's to flavor and preserve rather than to harm. Salt and light. For us, lighthouses are everywhere. Each lighthouse, you may not know this, but for people who live on the sea, every lighthouse along a shoreline pulses at a unique rate. And so by looking at the maps, the mariners know which lighthouse is at which point because they time the pulses. So counting the intervals between the pulses, sailors know exactly where they are. And that's why the lighthouse is so powerful. It warns both of danger and it guides to safety. And again, it's another experience of paradox, but lighthouses have become very important to me, knowing that they pulse so differently to warn of danger or to beckon home. So to be both of those. Fog. This island is surrounded and shrouded in fog much of the time. In fog, it's easy to become disoriented. Sounds seem to come from everywhere and you're not sure where they are. So the foghorn becomes a hopeful sound, guiding, warning. I've often thought of us as foghorns for one another. Hopeful, guiding, and also warning. Bread. Newfoundlanders have more words for bread than most cultures do. I think about our Inuit brothers and sisters who have so many words for snow. If you translated that to Newfoundland, it would be bread. And I think about that story of the boy with the 5 barley loaves and the 2 fish. What is that little bit that we have to offer? To look for the little bits. And though that may seem kind of minimalistic, how important it is to look for the hope, to look for the small things, for the signs of hope. As I've been reflecting on all this, the notion of that Vatican II gives us, that Gaudium et Spes presents, of us as a leaven and as a kind of soul for human society has been brought home to me. How important it is for me, for us, to be leaven in the world, to be signs of something life-giving, to give life, to be the small thing that makes the bread rise. in the midst of such a difficult situation, such a traumatic situation, to be people who make hope rise. One of the things that I've struggled with most is, as a musician, is that Newfoundlanders love music, but we've not been able to put this experience to music. We've not been able to put this experience to poetry. Some of our dramatists have tried to deal with and to address the wake of the abuse crisis, the effect of the abuse crisis, but our musicians have been silent. And to me, that speaks of the depth of the trauma. When our musicians cannot find a way to express themselves in the middle of this experience, this trauma, it speaks of the depth of it, that we are not ready yet. So even after 35 years, it's the music that points me to the not yet of this experience. I love a poem of a Sister of Mercy from Australia, Mary Wickham. And so we ask ourselves in this strangest of years, what are the old roads that will enable the new music? Where are the border crossings for creativity? Who is crafting the new harps? What is the new music? Who is able to render the music in meaningful sound? For what and whom and where do we play lament? For what and whom and where do we play glad song? For what and whom and where do we play lullaby? What do we remember? What do we forget? What must we remember? What can we not afford to forget? Where is the blessing? Where is the hope? Where is the new music? You've heard enough stories from me to know that Newfoundlanders value story and how important it is for us eventually to find ways to tell our story, to tell it to one another, to tell it to the world. If this was the first place in the world where this abuse crisis really broke and hit, and the first place where a commission was created to try to address the root causes and to point a way forward, then how do we tell that story? And how do we continue to make sense of this experience? How do we give it expression in our own lives and to the world? I'm going to leave the iceberg for now in the tea. And I'm going to close this part of the day with the Ode to Newfoundland, because it takes every piece of our rock and our music, our weather, and kind of tells a story of resilience that I'd like you to hear.
We're not getting your audio, Anne.
May have to restart share screen and share sound.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, let me try that. I will try it. Let's try here. Oh, I see. Yeah, I can do that. Let's try it again.
When spreads the cloud.
We had it for 10 seconds.
Let's try it. Yeah, it tells me that Zoom has crashed.
Ah, I see.
Let's try it one more time.
Of shimmering white at winter's stern command.
Maybe back it up to the beginning.
Through short
Let's try it again. We're not good with the technology today. I'll try it one more time. Here we go.
When sun rays crowned by pine-clad hills and summer spreads her hand, when silvern voices tune thy rills, we love thee, smiling land. We love thee, we love thee, we love thee, smiling land. When spreads thy cloak of shimmering white at winter's stern command, through shortened day and starlit night, we love thee, frozen land. We love thee, we love thee, we love thee, frozen land. When blinding storm gusts spread thy shore and wild waves lash thy strand, through spindrift swirl and tempest roar, we love thee, windswept land. We love thee, we love thee, we love thee, windswept land. As loved our fathers, so we love. Where once they stood, we stand. Their prayers we raise to heaven above. God guard thee, Newfoundland. God guard thee, God guard thee, God guard thee, Newfoundland.
It's hard to put any kind of closing words on the experience because it's not done. But what I hope you've heard is one person's attempt to be a missionary in the midst of a very unusual mission field. And that this has really been an experience that has moved me to not only ask my own questions, but to try to walk with others and to be that mercying that Pope Francis speaks of and that I think God would wish. And I'm going to pass it right back to
Kevin.
who's
Hi.
there, Kevin.
Yeah. Can I ask a when question? One of you introduced this, what happens when? What happens when the properties that were once the places where you celebrated liturgies are up for sale and the buildings themselves are part of the problem?
Yep. At the moment, and really, I can't speak much to that because it's kind of an ongoing thing. But it's one of the things now that is everybody wants compensation for the victims and survivors. That's not a question. But as every single property is sold, people will have questions, will be angry. So the what happens when is what we're living through right now.
First question up in the chat box, Anne, is what do you say to people when they tell you that they've actually given up on the Catholic Church because of the abuse scandal?
Hardly ever say anything. I usually get them to try to get them to tell me some of their story, what that's been for them. I understand, part of me understands how someone could do that, could walk somewhere different. I can't. For me, it's been, though there have been times, to be honest, when I've been very tempted and almost wanted to, I can't. It's the church, you, not so much any building, not so much a hierarchical structure, but you, the people I fell in love with in rural Newfoundland, the people who loved me into being a person who could respond in some way. Um, I can't go anywhere else, even though there are times I would want to. So I have great sympathy and a depth of understanding for those who might walk somewhere different. Life treats us all differently, and our response to God as we understand God and God's call, each one of us, is different. My response is to listen.
The next question is a very personal one, actually, and you can choose to go with it as you wish. But the question is, how is your cousin, the one that you spoke of right at the beginning? And the framing of the question is because the person says, I have seen people destroyed by clerical abuse.
I have too. I have known people who actually died by suicide as a result of this. I know of others. In the case of my cousin, he's actually fine. He was able to deal with what happened to him in a creative way and to respond well to it. And I, to be honest, even at the very beginning, at the outset, I knew that he was already living a full and creative life. So it wasn't as if I always wondered what happened to this person. In fact, it seemed like it was such a surprise that it had happened. So I have seen people respond in different ways, and as time goes on, respond and live in different ways. I've seen people begin their journey in total devastation and go somewhere very different. And I've seen people where it's like waves crashing and constant riding that wave. And I've seen people who have really struggled and been devastated. It's a mystery to me, how we all respond in different ways. And I've seen communities, like there's a way you can look at this whole crisis. There's no other word, because it's ongoing and it's so profound in its effects. I've seen not only individuals struggle and ride those waves and sometimes be submerged by them, but I've seen communities as well. This is not just an individual, an experience for any one of us. There are communities that have ridden this wave too, and who are still riding it, and sometimes being submerged, sometimes and sometimes rising above. There is, I guess, an overall thing I would say is the resilience of Newfoundlanders is inspiring, by and large, inspiring. But the one thing that's always made me stop is we can't put it to music. We can't put it to poetry. We're not able to do that. And that tells me that the depths of this we're still living.
I'd like to pick up on your comment about using the Gander 9/11 story. You said it was because of the trauma in that community, there was an ability to respond to trauma elsewhere. The reason I latch onto that is that that's what Henry Nouwen talks about in the notion of the wounded healer, that healing comes best with those who recognize healing in others, but also have the gift of having acknowledged woundedness within themselves. Could you say more about that?
Maybe a little. I think, Kevin, that that's very true. It's Nouwen's idea of a wounded healer that now people will say, it's Newfoundlanders are always hospitable and leave it at that. And there is truth to that. But the way those folks were reached out to, not just in Gander, but in St. John's and in Stephenville and in Goose Bay, in oh gosh, little place like Nora's Arm, Gambo. These people were welcomed with open arms as fellow travelers who'd come upon a hard spot in the road. And it was an experience, kind of a joyful meeting in the most unusual of situations. So, it's turned into a Broadway musical. But I think the heart of it, if you really dug down a little bit and twisted around, that it's Nouwen's notion of the wounded healer. And Albert Schweitzer kind of had it too. He used to talk about those, he called it, now it's kind of a sexist term, but he talked about the fellowship of those who bear the mark of pain. That it's where the holes in our lives meet each other. That's where we can enter in. I guess a little bit of Leonard Cohen too, that there's a crack in everything and that's where the light gets in, that it's in and through the holes in our lives that we can actually get into each other and make a difference in each other's lives, and hopefully a difference for the good, because it can be the other too. But that experience of 9/11, I have some of the most wonderful stories of that time. And I think it was because this is a community that knows pain and knows how to welcome those who've been through pain. It's not just the abuse crisis. Hey, I mean, that comes from communities that live close to nature, communities that live close to the sea and know that the sea gives and the sea takes, that the woods give and the woods take away. Any community that can live that and live that well will know how to welcome those who've been through something similar.
Here's a question that talks about symbolism and symbolic action. In our diocese, the residential school has been another area where healing and mercy are needed. I wonder at times if there is not some way that the church can publicly, in specific locations where there is so much pain, demonstrate sorrow at what has occurred, our sorrow at what has occurred, and then show mercy. Father Ron Rolheiser has spoken of just setting our faces in the dust as the old prophets had done. Is there a place for that? And what might that look like?
I would love if we would ask that question in our communities, like what that would look like. Do you remember early in the pandemic in 2020, and that visual of Pope Francis in St. Peter's Square alone, and that liturgy of reconciliation that he really, with very little help, I'm sure he had lots of help, but the visual was really of him walking up those steps. There's something about the power of ritual. When I lament the fact that our musicians have not been able to make new music on this one, when our poets have not been able to, and I think that's probably true too of other situations like the residential school situation. But ritual, where no words are necessary at all, might have a power to evoke a common response, if not a common way forward, or And I think we need to do some things again and again and again and again. Once is not enough because the situations are so long-standing, so deep, they go right to the bone, of who we are. So if we do ritual, if we create ritual, one experience of it may not bring healing. One experience may not bring wholeness. But to be patient and to do it again and again, maybe there's a kernel there.
You talked a little earlier about you were asked not to be too churchy. Let's dig a little into that. Because, I mean, we can smile and kind of, yes, that's the kind of a playful kind of thing. But it isn't playful. It's a question to suppress what we believe. It's a question to suppress and mask what we might otherwise say willingly to other people. So there's a harm in that as well. What would you say about that?
There certainly is. There really is. But for me though, Kevin, and this is just me, the response I would try to make to people would be based on what their need is. And not mine, although that's a struggle. So when my high school friends, planning what it was a ritual of remembrance for the girls who had died. The girls now are all old women like me, but for those who had died, and we were placing a stone in a walkway in a public park in the center of St. John's, and they wanted to do it the placing of the stone itself was ritual, but to do it in a way that kind of brought all those women into our midst. And that was the request was, now don't make it too churchy, Anne. And I mean, my response might have been, well, I am church. That's who we are. That's who I am. I didn't. I said, I'll try to make it as friendly and as inclusive as I can, but I'll let you folks, the team, you can all have a go at it before we actually celebrate the ritual. And it turned out that we were able to do something that wasn't, I think what they meant was inclusive. Let's make it as inclusive as possible. Because so many of my generation is not in the church building. Do I think they're church? Yeah, I do. I think the church is way bigger than a building. But so many have made choices not to be part of either the institutional structure or to be in the buildings. And I have to respect that. I'm called to be their friend, to walk with them, no matter what. And so I try to do that as well and as creatively and as faithfully and in as sisterly manner as possible. But it can be difficult in our own families, in my own family, in part because of the abuse crisis, but also just other forces at work in society. Many of my own family don't go to church. Does that mean they're not church? I don't think so. I think in many ways they share experiences with their networks with me that are very much church. Just not what I would have recognized 40 years ago, or we would have recognized 40 years ago. And it's a real struggle. It's raised issues for adult faith formation about where do we do adult faith formation? Where do we walk with people? If it's only with those who are in our buildings, then we're missing a vast swath of what church really is, and those who are our community, they're our people. So yeah.
This next question is, as you know, parishes across the country and around the world, in fact, are involved in a synodal process. So the question is, in your opinion, will the synod address this abuse?
I hope so, and I think so. When I read the North American report and the report for the continental phase, the working document, I think the answer is yes. But I can tell you a story from our local synod, the phase one, the local diocesan phase of the synod, and I was one of the facilitators here in our archdiocese. The story that sticks with me and that moves me most is people were asked, you don't need to answer, we said, you don't need to answer all 10 questions. That's a bit much. If you have one question that really speaks to you, that's what we'll talk about in our focus groups. And so we did all kinds of focus groups in rural Newfoundland, around in the city, everywhere. But what strikes me is a woman in a rural area who, when we came to the focus groups, to the actual online session, she said, I took that question about who walks with who's in, who's out, who do we listen to, who do we not? She said, the very first question, I took it and I said, all of a sudden, she said, my brother's face came to me. And she said, he walked away from church the day that Father Jim Hickey was charged in 1988. And he never came back. And she said, that wasn't what was on my heart. What was on my heart was, I never talked to him about it. So it didn't just drive wedges in communities, it drove wedges between brothers and sisters. And she said, it dawned on me that I never asked him what was going on. And she said that day, so this is January 2 years ago. January a year ago. She put on her snowshoes and she went to his cabin in the woods, a 2-hour journey by snowshoe. She went in, she knocked on his door, he let her in, she sat down and she said, I have the strangest question for you. But she said, you haven't been in church since 1988. Why'd you go? And he said, I didn't go anywhere. I'm still here. You just never came looking for me. She said, well, doesn't that mean you went somewhere? He said, no, I'm still here, but nobody asked me what was going on. And so they ended up as a brother and sister, for the first time in 35 years, having a conversation about why he'd made the choice he made and how she felt about that and what were her choices that made her taken her. It was absolutely, for me, of all the things I heard in the whole diocesan phase of the synod, that one really struck me, that this brother and sister, for the first time, were brought together by the first question on that first phase of the synod. And that's what gives me hope. If the first question on the first round of the synod can cause, or kind of begin that conversation between two people who'd not talked for 35 years, what else is possible in this synod? I have great hope for this.
I'm going to ask John Power to ask the first of his two questions. Can you ask the first question, John? And then there's another question that I want to ask, and then we'll come back to your second question, please, John.
Well, I don't want to put you on the spot, Anne. I was just wondering, are there ongoing opportunities in the parishes for people to continue to talk and to share and heal, and to use some of the new strategies that we've learned in our dialogue with in the synod process, but especially youth, and the youth who they don't have a history of connection with the church, and it's okay to say that they're on the peripheries, but where are there opportunities to bring people in, and how do we do that?
Oh, John, that's such a great
that's
question.
Heavy, I know.
No, but that'd be a great dialogue just on its own, and probably 2 or 3 dialogues. But of course, yes, there are opportunities. Here's the issue from my perspective as someone who is in the field of adult faith formation all the time. The issue is that twofold, that we as church have not placed enough eggs in the adult faith formation basket to really equip adults to facilitate and then enter and invite people into these conversations. So we're facing a poverty of background, of imagination, and also of resources. And that's point 2. To do this, it doesn't take a lot of resources, but some. It takes openness, it takes willingness, and some resources, because sometimes it costs a bit of money. And it takes a bit of money to train people well. We've not really, as a church, we haven't put any legs under the Directory for Catechesis has told us in the last 2 incarnations and even in the last 3 incarnations of it, that adult faith formation is the most important form of catechesis. And we've not really given legs to that. So that would be my hope, is that we will at some point. So are there opportunities? Yeah, look what you're doing right here. Some dioceses have a history of good adult faith formation. So yes, those when people are formed to be facilitators of dialogue rather than dispensers of information, I think there's something possible. Now I'm laughing at Christine Taylor there nodding, because I think that, because I know Christine asked a question about this too, but I think it's really important that adult faith formators be invited into ministry, offered opportunities for training and formation, and given scope for that work. Because more than giving information, though that can be important, helping people to ask their questions, share their joys and sorrows, and do that in the light of faith, that's the job of a good adult faith formator. And so my hope, more than any other hope, beyond, that we all live in peace and that we can find sources of healing for those traumas that harm us, is that we can, as a church, take seriously what the Directory for Catechesis tells us about the importance of adult faith formation. And I think that's would be, if we did that, it would be a positive way forward. To be able to, Melanie Svoboda, she's a writer in spirituality and religious education and catechesis. She says the job of a catechist is to put our stories into dialogue with the story, and to have them talk into each other. Oh, if we could only do that, eh? And especially with people who will need opportunities to ask their questions, to have a place of openness. And there's a third piece to your question, John. It's, where do you find these folks? Because they're not all in the pew. So I think we need to form people who are missionary disciples, fed by the Eucharist, fed by their participation in the life of the community, encouraged by that, and sent out by that same community to go out where those folks are. Whether that's to grocery stores, whether that's to gyms, whether it's to other agencies and gathering spots in our society, our workplaces, but to send people out as missionary disciples and to proclaim good news by the way we live our lives, that make people, I think it's like, the movie When Harry Met Sally, the line, I want what she's having. Not exactly like they meant it, but who draw people to goodness, to truth, to beauty, to Christ by the way we live our lives, and at least prompt them to ask some questions.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
It is a real challenge, and every time we meet, many of the people on the screen, we pray that the Holy Spirit will guide us, because the color of our hair, we're getting old, we're not going to be around, and there's nobody coming behind us. I shouldn't say nobody, we need people, younger people, to step up, and they need the adult education. This is one form of adult education, and we're doing it well in the parish, but we're not reaching many people.
I'm going to say a word about the youth ministry too. I see around Canada, not even looking south of the border, but around Canada, some really exciting things happening with helping youth to be those missionary disciples and young adults. I'm conscious of a friend of mine in Toronto. It's a Redemptorist, so you can say I'm biased, but his name is Santo Arrigo, and Santo is our director of young adult faith formation, as well as now he's our, like regional superior for Redemptorists in English speaking Canada. But what he does is he has gathered a group of young adults. It's a very permeable, loose group of young people. And he invites them into service. So they'll go and they'll spend an afternoon making lunches and gathering blankets and hot coffee and whatever else might be needed. And they'll go out into the streets at night and kind of share the sandwiches and the lunches with people in need. Doesn't have to be homeless people in need. They'll talk to them. And then if there's a need for the heavy stuff, the blankets, the coats, Santa will be driving around the neighborhood in the van. And they'll radio him or message him, and he'll come and he'll bring whatever is necessary from the van. And afterwards, they go somewhere and just chat about it. And it's in concert with a kind of concentrated program of things like Bible and beer, they call it. They'll go to a pub and talk about faith issues.
I love it.
And
Bible.
yeah, Bible and beer. It's because remember they used to do what was the program? I can't remember the name of it, but yeah, it's like their own version of Bible and beer. But they'll just go and talk about faith issues, and there's no pressure to be coming to mass all the time or whatever. But surprise, surprise, they found that some people do. That's right, Christine, theology on tap. So people have tried to. People have because that's a copyrighted program. People do. I've also heard pizza with a purpose. But whatever it takes to be a little bit creative. Sometimes these things take a bit of money. Sometimes they don't. And one of the things that Santo has found is that lots of times there are donors who are really, really happy to support something like this that engages young people and helps those on the streets or those in need. So I think it's being creative. Hey, looking for places where we can make a difference without the expectation that they come. But surprise, surprise, many do. It's not always on our terms, I suppose, is the thing.
I want to move on to the very difficult thing that you said about 3/4 of the way through your presentation. You said that an adversarial process makes us adversarial. And that's about harm, I think. It's also about intention, and it's also about challenge. Could you say a little bit more about how you don't become adversarial?
Oh, Kim, that's such a great question. It's been a real insight for me. My chair keeps running away from me. It's been a real insight for me through a lot of the court processes has been that logically, naturally, it sets people against one another. And isn't our goal, now there is a place for that. Obviously, there's a need for that. And that to have court designated restitution can be really, really important and powerful and a sign and all that. And I think that needs to be. However, I also think that we as community need to not allow processes that by their nature set people against one another. That's the opposite of what we want to be healing and reconciling, and somehow balance that with court-appointed, court structured restitution processes. How do we become a people not adversarial, people of reconciliation, people of healing, people of listening, people of hope. And I don't have an answer for that yet. Maybe I never will, but together we can do it. I'm sure that there are ways that we can make these processes places where unity is possible, where love is shared, and where healing is fostered, where compassion reigns. And so it's hard to see that in some of the current processes, but I would love to see more examples where that's true, where people are not pitted against one another, but work together for common healing, for wholeness. And I mean, to be a community where compassion and mercy reign would be my dream. I would think we'd be awfully close to the reign of God then.
Well, I think that's a wonderful final line of this part of our session. And I'm now going to call on Jennifer Leddy to give a summary and a response to what we've just heard this afternoon. Jennifer, over to you, please. Jennifer, can you unmute yourself, please?
Okay.
There we go.
So, Anne, how can we thank you? Let us count the ways. First, we would like to thank you for actually coming here today and making a presentation on a very delicate, very difficult, and very painful topic. Thank you for sharing your personal story, a very intimate story of how you have been responding to the abuse crisis, a story of compassion and kindness, of being a missionary of hope in a strange land. Most of us of a certain age well remember when the news first broke about the abuse at Mount Cashel and the abuse at the Archdiocese by several priests. We were shocked, we were angry, we were disillusioned, we had lost trust, and like you, we were ill-equipped to deal with it. But you were in the eye of the storm and considered a representative of the church as a teacher in a denominational school. It must have been so difficult for you to be living this crisis, but you became part of the solution by the decisions that you made in your own life. Thank you so much for identifying the questions that most Catholics had at the time and really persist today, not only in the Archdiocese, but I think around the Catholic world. So do we go or do we stay? If we stay, are we somehow complicit? How can we be faithful? And to what are we even being faithful? And what does faith look like? What does it act like? What does it feel like? Where is God in all of this? Where is God in our midst? Thank you for reminding us, and we do need to be reminded of this, that we, the people, are the church. It's not a building. That it's important to share with one another, to accompany one another. We need community. We have to be foghorns for each other. That's a great image. We have to look for signs of hope. We have to be leaven in the world. We have to make hope rise. Thank you for your work in the diocese on adult education and your continuing work with the Redemptorists. I think we need to put a few more eggs in the adult faith formation basket in St. Basil's, and let it be a place to help people share their joys and their hope in the light of faith. So thank you very much for that. Maybe you'll come back and help us a bit with that. Thank you for giving us ideas, of how to respond to people who wonder, why are you still in the church? A few years ago, and not that long ago, you had to sort of justify why you left the church. Now you have to justify why you stay in the church. But those were helpful ideas about how not to be too churchy and to let your friends be where they're at and you be where you're at. And also, I think it's important what you said at the end about how sexual abuse crisis has had very widespread repercussions. And now parishes are being sold, that people who've spent their whole lives in the parish, who contributed money to it, are having their parishes be sold. And so I'm thinking that when the news about Mount Cashel broke more than 30 years ago, it inspired other dioceses throughout the world to either get in place some better policies and procedures or review what they had. And the Archdiocese at that time of St. John's was definitely half an hour ahead of everybody else. And that helped all those other dioceses. And once again, the Archdiocese is half an hour ahead. And because we're going to be looking to see what are all those parishioners going to do who no longer have a building to go to, how they're going to have to redefine what it is to be a parish. Will they find alternative faith communities? What are they going to look like? Will they still have their faith, and how are they going to be nurtured about that? So while it's still very painful 30 years on, and must be totally disorienting, we have to thank you and the Archdiocese of St. John's for once again being half an hour ahead. And thank you for giving us hope and a theology of place, I think. So Anne, thank you so much for being with us, and all the best for your wonderful work you are doing in Newfoundland and throughout Canada, I think. Thank you.
You're very welcome. And thank you for the opportunity to be here. It's really been a privilege. Thank you.
And thanking isn't over yet. Just remind people that the video of this session will be posted on the St. Basil's website in the coming days, so you will be able to access it there as well. I now turn the focus over to Elizabeth Elliott, please.
Thank you. What a wonderful afternoon. A real wonderful session. And I want to share with you information about a special gift that we have for you, Anne. See if this comes up. Oh my gosh, I've got everything except what I want. It's going to come up here, I think. No, I'm sorry. I had the picture ready. It's not there. Let me try one more time. No. All right. I'll tell you about it. We'll send it to you anyway. Father Darrell's niece is embracing her Indigenous heritage, and she's become very proficient at beading. And so at Father's request, she has prepared a beautiful beaded brooch for you. And I'm so sorry that it hasn't come up on, I had it ready to show on the screen, but we'll be sending it to you as a token of our appreciation. And it's been wonderful having you here with us this afternoon. Thank you again on behalf of everyone. I'd like to tell everyone about our next session. We won't be having a conversation during March because we're into Lent then and we have other programs going on. But on April 16th, we will have our next conversation. It is our guest speaker will be Dr. Christopher De Bono, and he will speak on Catholic responses to medically assistance in dying in Canada. Now, this session will not be recorded, so everyone is urged to register and to listen to it live. That will be your only chance to hear Dr. De Bono, who is an ethicist, speak about this really important topic, a timely conversation, I would say. So I'd like to thank everyone who took part this afternoon. There, Father Darrell came through. There's the brooch. Isn't it magnificent? Mm-hmm. Thanks, Father. That's great. So thank you, everyone, for taking part this afternoon. And hope you have a good Lent, which starts on Wednesday. May God be with us all. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Father.
Thanks.
I had it already. Those things.
Mhm.
It's beautiful, Daryl. Thank
Oh,
you.
good. It is, it's much more impressive to see it with your eyes in person
I
than
bet.
on a photo. It's just, she's really good at this.
Wow. That's amazing. Well, thank you. Oh, I look forward to that.
Now, Andre, as soon as you click off, then the recording is going to start transferring into I don't know, some sort of file. It's going to be, you've recorded it on your computer. So what we'll do is you'll need to talk to Ed. Is your computer a laptop or a desktop? Desktop.
You're muted.
Okay, so he may have to come visit you at your house.
Or I
Just-
can give him a stick or something.
Oh, if you can do that, yeah, sure. So anyways, it's on your computer though.
Yeah.
It's not going to be on mine.
Okay, no, that's fine.
Okay, I just wanted to let you know. Thank you. And thanks a million. It was great.
It
You're,
was.
you're very, very welcome. It's been my pleasure.
So you've been in Ireland.
I have. I was in Ireland working with the Redemptorist chapter there. Yeah. Yeah. And then I just got back from Texas last night we're doing some work with our students and a lecture at the Oblate School of Theology. Yeah.
What students? You said our students.
Oh, Redemptorist students. Yeah,
Are they studying there?
they are. Yeah. Yeah. They're studying at Oblate.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That's a good school.
It is. Yeah. Yeah. Really good. Well, listen, thank you very much. I really appreciate the invitation and I hope that was okay.
Yeah, it was fantastic. Thanks, Anne.
Okay.
You'll be hearing from us again. You've given us all kinds of ideas.
Yes.
And
Okay.
Anne, it was lovely. It was lovely to meet you during the week. And I wanted to say that, listening and learning and just coating people with love is the only way forward.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally agree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have a good Sunday.
All right. Take care, everybody.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Yes. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.